Alright, so in this video, you are going to see James O'Brien completely and utterly take Nigel Farage apart over his history of alleged racism and anti-Semitism going back to his school days. James has all the receipts, and this is one of the most epic takedowns you will ever see. If you want to see more videos like this, show your support for the channel by hitting the like and subscribe buttons, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. Now let's watch this together, and then I will give you my thoughts in full at the end.
It is 5 minutes after 12. Can you think of a politician who, if the actual Attorney General, the UK's top law officer, a prominent politician who the UK's top law officer was urging to apologise to contemporaries who claimed he had racially abused them while at school? Not just the UK's top law officer, also one of the most senior Jewish government ministers, calling upon a prominent politician to acknowledge and apologise for the deep hurt that he had caused many people with his rancid, my word, anti-Semitism. How much coverage would you expect that to get if, for example, it were Jeremy Corbyn who was being called upon by the Attorney General to apologise for allowing, or in Corbyn's case, it was mostly allowing anti-Semitism, although he did indulge in it himself, he would argue accidentally, offering support, for example, to a muralist who had painted an incredibly anti-Semitic mural, which the removal of which Jeremy Corbyn objected to, under his account, without knowing what was actually in the mural, and we can't prove otherwise. But can you think of what would have happened to Jeremy Corbyn? How much coverage it would be getting, dare I even say, on LBC, let alone in various newspapers, if the UK's top law officer had urged Jeremy Corbyn to apologise to contemporaries who claim that he had racially abused them while at school, including in the case of Jewish schoolmates sidling up to them and growling, "Hitler was right," or gas them, sometimes adding a long hiss to simulate the sound of the gas showers. This is a gentleman called Peter Etedgui, who also said he'd never experienced anti-Semitism growing up, so the first time that this vicious verbal abuse came out of Farage's mouth was deeply shocking. It wasn't just Jews, however. Peter goes on, "I wasn't his only target. I'd hear him calling other students P-word or W-word. Alan Sked, of course, the founder of UKIP, reported that Farage regularly used the N-word in his company, in fact explaining why they shouldn't bother having ethnic minority candidates because they were never going to win the N vote. Again, that's the former LSE academic and founder of UKIP, Alan Sked, recalling the adult Farage, not the teenage Farage. He would urge students of colour to go home. Peter Etedgui goes on, "I tried to ignore him, but it was humiliating, it was shaming. This kind of abuse cuts through to the core of your identity." And then other classmates have queued up to endorse his recollections. One, Anthony Butler, saying, "Peter's recollections of Nigel Farage's naked racism and anti-Semitism in his school days left me with a deep sense of regret. A contemporary and classmate of Farage, I clearly recall him relentlessly hectoring and bullying Etedgui with shouts of stupid Y-word in the playground. Peter was a small, rather shy and sensitive boy, and Nigel was a physical coward who could easily have been silenced, but I do not recall anyone doing so. If he will accept it, I apologise wholeheartedly to Peter Etedgui." Another, Jean-Pierre Lehoux. Farage used to say things like, Judah to Peter, which is the German for Jew, in the way it was said in the 1930s, with a long U in a menacing way. Farage used to say things like Hitler was right and gas him, that sort of thing. But he also used to sing this song, which I later discovered was based on George Formby's Bless Them All. But he had a whole load of lyrics on which I can remember it verbatim. He would sing gas 'em all, gas 'em all. Forgive me for this, a trigger warning for you. Into the chambers they crawl, we'll gas, and then more language I'm not going to repeat on the radio. Ending with, and all their effing kids. Another, Martin Russell, recalls Farage certainly made comments to the Jewish guy in that class, Peter Etedgui, comments like under his breath, and comments about how they had missed you, that sort of thing. Noticeably more of those times than the rest. He was known for it across the school. And on it goes. Bob Jope, a former teacher, Andy Field, Mark Hayward, Dave Edmonds, Tim France, Nick Gordon-Brown, Luke Gray. One pupil from a minority ethnic background who remains anonymous, seeks to remain anonymous. Another. Similarly, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other former pupils. I remember him singing on occasion, says one, leading those songs. These would be the Hitler Youth songs that David Lammy apologised for suggesting Nigel Farage had sung, because, of course, Nigel Farage, well, he sort of oscillates, as we'll hear in a moment, between denying and dismissing, and then denying and then dismissing, and then dismissing and then denying and then dismissing. I definitely heard him singing racist marching songs at various occasions. If it comes to it, I would happily stand up in court and say it. My overriding memory is just a nasty little so-and-so and a racist. I think that line there might be crucial. I would happily stand up in court and say it, because that, of course, will inform any decisions taken on whether or not to pursue legal action against the now in excess of 20 former classmates who have come forward with similar comments. Another, I was in the CCF, that's the Combined Cadet Force, with him from 1979 to 1982. He did teach the younger members of the CCF the infamous Gas 'em All song, or at least led the singing of it on CCF coaches to training areas. Yet another former classmate, schoolmate, pupil. He was very strong-minded and had strong views about particular races. The word and then the Y word, used to describe Jewish people, was frequently deployed, used about 50 times in a row. I remember one particular thing he would do, a gesture where he would put his left hand over his left eye and make a sign. I can't say that out loud, although it referenced a former Israeli defense minister, while he used a very recognizable hand gesture used to denote masturbation. There you go. That's about the most sanitized way in which I can describe what this pupil remembers him doing. These are all different people, by the way. I haven't cited a memory longer than one sentence from the same person. These are all different former pupils at Dulwich College. His behaviour towards cadets of ethnic background was no better than to those of Jewish religion. He held a cadet rank of sergeant or similar, so was able to issue work or task details of his own devising. All pretty grim and pointless usually. Guess which ethnicity or religion got the wrong end of his stick? Another one, he was someone who always had slogans. He would repeat things ad nauseum. He would certainly say the National Front is the white man's front. Whenever you watched a film in class and there was a black face, he would say, "Are you English?" Of course, it is a member of his current political party who objects to seeing black faces in adverts and has not been disciplined by Nigel Farage. I believe the phrase she used was that it drives her mad. Well, I guess she's in good company, unless, of course, he's changed enormously in the interim, in which case you would have expected him to do what the Attorney General is calling upon him to do and apologise, or at least account for his behaviour. One thing you may have noticed, and I don't know how closely you're following this coverage, because guess what? It's not getting a lot of coverage. But one thing you may have noticed, if you have been following this coverage closely, is that he has not availed himself of any opportunity to condemn either anti-Semitism or racism, either while apparently dancing on the head of a pin over what he is and is not responsible for. I've followed this stuff very closely over the years. I've written about some of these accounts in my last book, How They Broke Britain, but the people... And I have spoken to some of these people before, but they weren't ready to put their names to their recollections. Recollections which I will have to keep repeating. Nigel Farage often denies, but not always, but often denies. And at the current time of talking, he is largely denying what he is being accused of by now over 20 classmates. But the reason why they didn't want to put their names to it is because people don't want to draw this sort of attention down on themselves. Some of them still don't. There are more out there with similar stories to tell, I can tell you that categorically, and there are more telling their stories now, still using the coverage of anonymity, still cloaked in the anonymity that they deserve. It's people like Peter Ettedgui and Jean-Pierre Lehoux who have decided, and it's a brave thing to do because it puts you in the public eye, it puts your head above a parapet they've never asked to have their heads put above. They've decided that obviously his riding high in the opinion polls and his enchantment of much of our right-wing media, who have shifted effortlessly from telling you Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy to telling you that Nigel Farage is a stand-up guy, has been so jarring and so arresting and so complete, which is why they have decided to come forward. So, I mean, there it is, an almost, I mean, well, a frankly extraordinary catalogue of accusation and recollection, which is garnering up to and including the Attorney General now calling upon him to, at the very least, apologise for the hurt that he caused these people at the time, and he has done precisely nothing. If you've been wondering where he was, now you know. He's hiding, like a coward. He's hiding because he knows that if he were to be having one of his regular press conferences, what happened to the press conferences he was having every 10 minutes? Because he knows that there's a small window now where journalists would actually find the wherewithal to ask him questions about these incidents, these allegations. Journalists would actually avail themselves of the opportunity to hold his feet to the fire on this kind of thing. He appears to have temporarily surrendered his season ticket for Laura Kuenssberg's Sunday morning BBC show. If you're wondering why, the answer is he's hiding. He doesn't want to have to account for these recollections, these accusations, these comments. He's claimed that he had never directly really tried to go and hurt anybody. If you're Jewish and you're listening to this, could you perhaps explain to the rest of us how you could suggest that somebody was missed by the gas chambers can be construed as not trying to hurt somebody or not directly insulting or hurting somebody? I don't know. But neither do I know why this is not garnering the kind of coverage that the much less obnoxious allegations of anti-Semitism that were levelled at, for example, Jeremy Corbyn garnered. Jeremy Corbyn, a party leader who I don't think at any point was leading in the opinion polls, was he? Nigel Farage currently leading in the opinion polls. Historic examples of, in Corbyn's case, usually accommodating anti-Semites or anti-Semitism, not actually making jokes about gas chambers or singing Nazi songs. Farage would appear to be enjoying something of a free pass from the rest of the media. One journalist has stepped up to the plate. Sharon Preet Kaur had a crack at him. Well, there's two examples of it, actually. The BBC's political editor in Wales managed to get 4.5 minutes with him last week, and ITV's correspondent Sharon Preet Kaur got a few seconds in order to put these questions to him as well when they tried to have a post-budget presser. But the reason why he's not popping up left, right and centre at the minute is because he is, for once, actually frightened that journalists might do their job. But that doesn't stop reporting. That doesn't stop reporting. Why do you think... And I'm going to choose my words very carefully. I always do, but, you know, nobody's perfect. Given that, particularly since the hideous events of October the 7th and the subsequent offensive in Gaza, culminating, of course, in what is widely regarded to be genocide, the allegation of anti-Semitism has been made probably more in the last few years in this country than at any other point I can remember. It's a stinging and a hefty allegation. Why is Nigel Farage not receiving more scrutiny for this extraordinary number of contemporaries coming forward with truly hideous stories? I'm going to play you some of the rare examples of him popping his head above the parapet since this happened. This is a man who you can't get off the television. He's on the television and the radio more than, he was on Question Time more often than David Dimbleby a few years ago. Why is he not getting properly scrutinised over this? It's not a rhetorical question. I want to know why you think it is. I've got my own theories and thoughts. Perhaps some people who've used anti-Semitism as a rhetorical device in recent years, often to try to silence criticism of what Israel was doing in Gaza, maybe they are not as concerned about it as they've previously professed to be. Or maybe I'm missing something here. But given that you can accuse almost anybody who has called into question Benjamin Netanyahu and his far-right government's conduct in Gaza of anti-Semitism, how come the same people aren't going off after Nigel Farage with his gas chamber jokes like a rat up a drainpipe? 0345 60 60973 is the number that you need. So we'll have a little listen to how he copes with these questions, and then we will have a look at the questions or the question of why he seems to be allowed to have this stuff on his record, while other people categorically are not permitted to have rather milder examples of prejudice and bigotry on theirs. I think this is probably too serious territory to open up the doors of Idiot's Corner, but Martin answers the question of why Nigel Farage's hideous anti-Semitism, as recalled by countless classmates, is receiving such scant coverage from people who normally report on every wrinkle of his brow. Martin's response is, we simply don't care. Oh, I mean, mate, you might not care about Jewish people being told that the gas chambers, it was a shame that they didn't end up in the gas chambers, but I do. Most people listening to this programme do, but I'm grateful for your input, because is it the case perhaps that Nigel Farage fans don't care? People voting for or flirting with reform are perfectly comfortable with the idea of putting a man who tells Jewish schoolboys that they belong in gas chambers into Downing Street. Maybe Martin does speak for rather more people than I would like to believe. And again, tempting though it may be to press the history button and have a look at what else Martin has to say on various subjects to see what kind of Venn diagram a character like that constructs in what passes for their conscience. The idea that that this is kind of acceptable, I don't know. What other answers can there be to the question of why this isn't garnering anything like the attention that it would garner if it was any other politician? And listen, there are arguments you can make, and which he's tried to make in a sort of characteristically worm-like fashion about, it was so long ago it doesn't matter. I can sit here today at the age of 53 and categorically tell you I've never said anything to a Jewish person about gas chambers, and I can categorically tell you that I never will. Even when I was 5, 15, 25, 35, 45, and give me a couple of years and I'll be 55. So why is he getting away with this? And what does it say about people who normally profess, particularly in the context of criticising Israel, normally reach for, often quite rightly, the highest levels of outrage in the context of anti-Semitism, or even alleged or perceived anti-Semitism? Why have they got so little to say about this? 0345 6060 973. I truly don't know. But here is one journalist, Gareth Lewis, the BBC's political editor in Wales, doing what, frankly, every journalist in the country worth the description should be doing every time he pokes his weaselly little head out of the hole in the ground that he's currently hiding in.
Did you racially abuse fellow pupils when you were at school?
No, this is 49 years ago, by the way. 49 years ago. Have I ever tried to take it out on any individual on the basis of where they're from? No.
At school, categorically on the record, you did not racially abuse fellow pupils?
I would never, ever do it in a hurtful or insulting way.
That's not quite the same as not doing it.
It's 49 years ago. It's 49 years ago.
What difference does it? What difference to the time?
Isn't it? Well, I just entered my teens. Can I remember everything that happened at school? No, I can't. Have I ever been part of an extremist organisation or engaged in direct, unpleasant personal abuse, genuine abuse on that basis? No.
You're not quite... That's very, very caveated. You're not quite ruling this out. The question is, did you ever racially abuse fellow pupils in school? No. You've caveated it with a hurtful way.
Not with intent.
What do you mean not with intent? I don't understand what you mean by not with intent. What does that mean?
You wouldn't do.
But what does that mean?
No.
No what?
No. I have never directly really tried to go and hurt anybody.
But you're opening the door there to perhaps you did it without meaning to offend.
Have I said things 50 years ago that you could interpret as being banter in a playground, that you could interpret in the modern light of day in some sort of way? Yes. But isn't it funny?
Okay, so you did say stuff to these people then?
I've never directly racially abused anybody. No.
Again, define directly for me. What do you mean by directly?
By taking it out on an individual on the basis of who they are or what they are. No.
Again, taking it out on somebody is different to saying
Have
stuff
I ever
to somebody.
misspoken in my life, in my younger days when I was a child? Probably.
So, the people then who've made these allegations...
Yeah, they've got good memories, haven't they?
Well, they're telling the truth, are they?
They've got good memories, haven't they?
Are they telling the truth, Mr.
Well,
Farage?
suddenly, after 49 years, they seem to have perfect recollection. I would say to you, there is a strong political element to this.
Okay, again, a slightly different answer to the question. Are they telling the truth?
No, they're not telling the truth. There are people who had very different... By the time I was 18, there were people there with very different political views, of course. And they disagreed with them. And, you know, right now today, you can say one thing in politics and another person takes it and says, that's sexist, that's racist, that's whatever it is. That's what happens, you know. All I can tell you is, by the time I was a grown-up, leaving that school, there was never any question of those things. But did I have disagreements with people? Political disagreements, yes.
Let me put it another way. Did you say things to these people that you did not intend to be hurtful or racist, but they took it that way?
I hope not.
So possibly you did then?
I hope I didn't. I'm going to say no, I didn't. I hope I didn't. None of us can be sure of anything we say ever, even today, that somebody else might take to be hurtful. But intentionally, no.
Would you apologise to them?
If they were genuinely hurt, of course.
OK, so is that an apology? Are you saying sorry to those people?
No, I'm not, because I don't believe I did anything that directly hurt anybody.
But yet they may have felt that.
Well, we're living in that world, aren't we? We're living in that world.
What do you mean living in that world?
Well, you know, I might say...
Did they take offence at racist language?
Look, you know, people can say you know, you can say someone's overweight and they can take serious offence, or you can choose not to say it. I have not done anything. And by the way, you are talking about something in 1977, and nobody has perfect recall of events of half a century.
Well, 20 people have recalled this, which would suggest there's a good collective memory here.
Yeah, which just shows you there's a huge political element to this. It's just nonsense that 20 people could say something like that without it being political in every way.
You're not quite ruling out
I'm not ruling out I didn't misbehave at playgroup when I was 6 or 5.
Well, we're talking about a lot older than this. You're not ruling out either that you said these words.
Dear, oh dear. It's 50 years ago.
I still don't understand the balance of the time.
I have not directly tried to insult anybody.
Again, that caveat directly. So you're almost admitting that you've said these words and have not...
I'm not a vicar. I may have said things last week that someone might have taken offence to, all right?
Did you say things back at school that people took offence to?
Without any shadow of a doubt. And without any shadow of a doubt, I shall say things tonight on this stage that some people will take offence to and will use pejorative terms about. That is actually, in some ways, you know, what open free speech is. Sometimes you say things that people don't like. Have I directly been racist towards people? No, never.
I'm not going to repeat some of the words that have been said, but they were quite specific, and it was very direct. Is that a true recollection then of what was said?
No, I don't believe it is for one moment.
Okay.
Again, worth reminding you, Dr. Alan Sked, very prominent academic at the London School of Economics, recalls Farage using the N-word very, very liberally. When he first joined UKIP, Alan Sked was the leader of UKIP. And he's lying, of course, about his age, because well into his sixth form, he stands accused of making these comments. Not denying all of them, tried to initially, threatened legal action, although that ship seems to have sailed. He continues to deny making any comments about gas chambers, although similarly Peter Ettedgui and many of his contemporaries categorically recall making them. I think of all the things that are disgusting about what you just heard, the idea that a Jewish person would somehow forget or misremember that kind of conversation, that kind of comment is, to my mind, curdling, actually. Who can truly claim that they're surprised by this, by these recollections, allegations, memories, call them what you will? You've really got two choices, haven't you? You're either going to pretend it doesn't matter because you're not publicly prepared to say that you're supremely comfortable with this kind of thing, both historically and currently, or find me someone who's been called the P word or the N word with genuine hatred, and who would chalk it up as banter or claim that it was easily forgotten, and I'll find you a liar. Here's another example. That was brilliant, wasn't it, by Gareth Lewis? You heard how calm he stayed and how blithely Farage expects to be able to gloss over it and move on to the next point. I've said it before and I'll say it again. He's the easiest person in politics to pin down. It's just a miracle that so few people bother to try. Many, of course, are too busy tickling his toes or quietly nodding along with his bigotries and hatreds. But some you could name, probably. You're surprised to see them not taking a rather stronger stand against what he quite plainly represents. But Gareth Lewis there staying super calm and just also doing that thing about asking him to define what he means by certain words. All of these comments getting filed under political. I can tell you one thing with absolute certainty. and that is that these people have been, many of these people, at least two that I have encountered personally, have been sharing these memories, these recollections for years, but they did not want to have their own names in the public eye. And now they've decided that they have little choice, that honour demands that they go public with these accusations. I can tell you that without a shadow of a doubt. Here's ITV's Charanpreet Kaur putting a question to him just before his post-budget press conference last Wednesday.
You said earlier this week that you never tried to hurt anybody with the comments that you made at school. You've described them as banter. Some of those who are on the receiving end clearly disagree. So given that they say you did hurt them, would you like to apologise to them?
Well, one person says they were hurt, and if they feel they were hurt, then I'm genuinely sorry. But I never, ever, ever would have said or done anything like that directly to a human being. Absolutely not.
He continues to contend that he or rather one of the people on the receiving end of this abuse continues to contend that he categorically did say the things he is accused of saying, and there is a long queue of people who witnessed it as well as people, of course, who were on the receiving end of other forms of racist abuse. I have a very strong memory of him using the W word for what we now call people of Afro-Caribbean origin, and the P word for those of South Asian origin, says Dave Edwards. Mark Hayward saying, I distinctly remember him coming in several times chanting Oswald Ernald Mosley, who of course was the leader of the British Union of Fascists. So why is this receiving so little attention? 0345 6060973. Here's Amelia Cox with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
36 is the time. So if you bear with me, phone lines are open. Why on earth is this politician, Nigel Farage, getting a relatively easy ride over allegations from a growing band of schoolmates, already in excess of 20, who recall him engaging in hideous racism and, frankly, close to unbelievable anti-Semitism? Once again, he continues to deny some of it, although it's hard to pin down precisely which bits he admits and which bits he doesn't. This is what he told LBC on Wednesday. I can tell you categorically that I did not say the things that have been published in The Guardian, aged 13, nearly 50 years ago. A lot of what was published in The Guardian focuses upon his time in the cadet force when he was 16, 17, 18. And the other bit that, of course, is worthy of mention in just that first sentence of his statement is that he was claiming not long ago that nobody could possibly remember what had gone on so long ago. So he can categorically recall exactly what happened then. He can accuse the people who claim that they were victims of his hideous anti-Semitism and racism of either lying or misremembering, but also, this is Farage in a nutshell. It's important, this. Will that work? What can get me off the hook for this? Well, no one can possibly remember what happened then. Oh, rats, that hasn't worked. Clearly these people are going to insist that they do remember. So I need a different line. I need a different wriggle. I need a different potential lie. Oh yes, I can remember absolutely everything that happened. So it is possible to recall with perfect accuracy things that happened decades ago, but only if you're me. So he can suddenly accept that people are perfectly capable of remembering categorically what happened 50 years ago or 45. So there's, even in the first sentence of that statement, not only have you got pure Farage deception and distraction and dishonesty, but you've also got epic hypocrisy that is visible from 100 miles away. Let's move on to the second sentence. Isn't it interesting? I am probably the most scrutinised figure in British politics, having been in public life for 32 years. Several books and thousands of stories have been written about me, but it is only now that my party is leading in the polls that these allegations come out. That's a lie. A lot of these allegations have been previously made anonymously. Michael Crick, of course, unearthed the letter written by a teacher at Dulwich College when he was in the sixth form, so several years after being 13, in which she questioned the wisdom of making a self-confessed fascist a prefect. Her name, even I can remember her name, which is extraordinary given that these allegations, according to Nigel Farage, these allegations are only coming out now. Her name was Chloe Deakin. and she was adamant that he had been overheard singing Hitler Youth songs while on CCF camps in the surrounding countryside, and that this would preclude him from being a prefect. So when he claims that these allegations are only coming out now, he is lying. He's also further insulting one of his accusers, because Peter Etegui has made it clear that the reason why he has now decided to put his name to his recollections and allegations is precisely because Farage is leading in the polls. So where previously he wanted to remain anonymous, now he is going public in the hope of increasing the volume on what he is saying, because it didn't really occur to anybody until relatively recently that this country would be bent backward or bigoted enough to put a man like this in Downing Street. The polls suggest that we might, so these people now feel compelled to come forward. Again, Farage knows that. Farage understands that. He is pretending not to, and betting, as always, on not being properly held to account for it by journalists. So when he says, it's only now that my party is leading in the polls that these allegations come out, he is lying. And then he adds, I will leave the public to draw their own conclusions about why that might be. Of course, the public don't have to. They can ask the classmates why they are only now coming forward and putting their names to their memories. And the simple reason is precisely because they fear for the country if somebody like this were to end up in Downing Street. So that is also a lie. Disingenuous, dishonest, deceitful, whatever D word you prefer. I think we can all agree on disgusting. We know that The Guardian wants to smear anybody who talks about the immigration issue. None of the things he's accused of really have anything to do with immigration. So why is he bringing that into things? Answer, to appeal to the people that carry him shoulder high through the metaphorical corridors of British public life, because they think he is as racist as they are. Let's get immigration on the table as quickly as possible. So it has nothing to do with immigration. There's no suggestion from any of these classmates of his that they weren't born here. What's he talking about? Answer, distraction, deception, dishonesty. Another sentence. The truth is, I have done more in my career to defeat extremism and far-right politics than anybody else in the UK, from my time fighting the BNP right up to today. A statement so hideously ridiculous that it barely merits scrutiny. But if you want to find out about his relationships with far-right extremists, there are several books I could recommend, including my own. Which actually picks up on some of the accusations that he claims have only recently come out, despite the fact that it was published 2 or 3 years ago. I think some of it's in my first book as well, which was published 5 or 6 years ago. This is not the first time the desperate establishment has come after me, and it will not be the last. So a former school friend, 20-odd former school friends are the establishment now. If you go to Dulwich College, does that automatically make you part of the establishment, or is it only the people that abhor antisemitism and racism that end up being part of the establishment, whereas the people who apparently indulge in it, they're the victims of witch hunts and unfair persecutions? What on earth does this have to do with the establishment? Shall I read you the list of names again, and you tell me what qualifies him to call them members of the establishment? So, again, I can categorically say that the stories being told about me from 50 years ago, that's a lie, are not true. But you said no one could possibly remember what had happened 50 years ago, so how can you possibly suddenly remember what did or did not definitely happen? Funny, isn't it? How easy it is, once you tug on a single thread, to watch the whole carefully cultivated facade fall to pieces and unravel. So why do people fail, refuse, decline to tug that thread so often, so repeatedly, and so completely? Why do you think he is getting such an easy ride? Plenty of you pointing out to me, and make of this comparison what you will, that he was absolutely adamant that at the age, I think, of 15, Shamima Begum could be held completely and categorically responsible for everything she thought and did for the rest of her natural life. So again, why would different rules apply to him? Why would the actions of one 15-year-old be dismissible? A 15-year-old who, of course, had been groomed by profoundly unpleasant influences, but another 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old engaging in objectively hideous and disgusting behaviour somehow deserves the benefit of the doubt because it was banter, or because nobody can remember. Oh, except me. I can remember it all, he claims, simultaneously. Or because You can't hold me to account for things that I said then, but I'm certainly not going to condemn anti-Semitism or racism now. Wouldn't it be embarrassing if there was a long and fairly comprehensive list of him engaging in conspiracy theories widely regarded as anti-Semitic long after he became an unpleasant carbuncle on public life in this country? That would be slightly inconvenient, and again something that I wonder why nobody else bothers to dig into. You can find out after this. Let me show you how it works for the core audience. Here you go. This is from Gareth. Isn't it coincidence that as all the main parties now feel threatened by reform, and they are a genuine threat, suddenly people's memories clear and the media is able to find lots of Nigel's ex-school friends who claim he was mean to them and said racist things, never remembered them during his UKIP days, EU Parliament days, or during the Brexit campaign? Strange. Gareth, to be fair, mate, you sent that at 12:34. I've subsequently explained how all of those things are blatant lies that you've been fed by Nigel Farage. I'd be interested to know whether it's changed your perspective at all. But again, let's run through them one by one. These claims were all made during in previous years, just that people weren't ready to surrender their own anonymity. A teacher at his school questioned whether or not somebody who was reported to have sung Hitler youth songs as he marched through the Kent countryside would be suitable material to be a prefect. You mentioned UKIP. Why were they never remembered during his UKIP days? Asked Gareth. Mate, the actual founder of UKIP was one of the first people to publicly state on the record that he had repeatedly heard Farage use racist language in his company, explaining that they shouldn't worry about fielding ethnic minority candidates because they were never going to win the N-word vote. So listen, you can call Alan Sked a liar if you want. I'm sure Farage has done, will do, or has flirted with the idea, but you can't claim that none of these allegations have been made previously, Gareth, any more than you can pretend that a teacher didn't write a letter to the headmaster about his alleged Nazi sing-songs, or indeed that the founder of the actual UKIP recalled him using hideously racist language on a regular basis. So now that you know this has been going on forever, Gareth, do you change your view? Or do you just change your excuse? I don't know. What about adult Farage? George Soros, of course, has often been the receptacle of all manner of anti-Semitic conspiracies. Tucker Carlson, formerly a presenter on Fox News, has subsequently started flirting with the worst extremities of far-right rhetoric, some would say consummating the relationship. Here is Farage on Tucker Carlson's show back in 2018.
He wants to break down the fundamental values of our society. And in the case of Europe, he doesn't want Europe to be based on Christianity. Now, all of this, whether it's Soros or some of those very strange people in California, all of this is based on some kind of self-loathing, some sort of guilt trip about the past. And in Soros's case, it's a guilt trip, of course, about Germany's wartime actions, the way the Jews were treated. In America, in many cases, it's how the native Indians were treated. It's all based on guilt, but it's not based on reality.
This idea of Jewish people being dedicated to the idea of undermining Christianity or Western values is an anti-Semitic trope as old as the hills. Tried to defend himself on this radio station earlier that year.
We've got open society with its many billions to spend every year, and I'm arguing we need to have a proper debate about the role of George Soros, not just in this country or America, but right across the European Union and the Western world. I think the Russian thing is nonsense, but I do think we should be discussing the role of Soros. Now, when I did this back in November, as I said earlier, I was called anti-Semitic for doing it. I thought, why on earth is this wave of trolls on Twitter and Facebook attacking me? I've never been called this before. Just for the record, folks, and George Soros was born 87 years ago in Hungary, and he was of Jewish birth. That is true. But when he's asked in an interview, Mr. Soros, are you religious? No. Do you believe in God? No. He may have been born Jewish, but actually, I would say he's an atheist. All right? And I think the reason some on the Remain side and the left are throwing this tag of anti-Semitism is they're scared what's going to be uncovered over the next 2 weeks.
What has been uncovered, I wonder? Fascinating there. The SS famously ceased their pursuit of Jewish people in Nazi Germany if Jewish people professed to be atheists, or if Jewish-born people insisted that they weren't religious at all. That would earn you a free pass from the Holocaust. Stuff that comes out of his mouth. Extraordinary. And remember, he said that he'd never been called anti-Semitic before, which must come as news to the people queuing up to claim that they remember him making jokes about gas chambers when he was at Dulwich College. Oh, and you remember Alex Jones? Of course you do. He's the bloke that accused the grieving parents of murdered children of being a hoax, something that never prevented Farage from appearing repeatedly on his programme. In fact, he used to have a season ticket for InfoWars and appeared there in 2018, again repumping this globalist rhetoric, which is widely regarded as a synonym or as a camouflage for anti-Semitic tropes.
I think the globalists have wanted to have some form of conflict with Russia as an argument for us all to surrender our national sovereignty and give it up to a higher global level. They've wanted it for years, and now they see their opportunity.
That's the globalists, or the Jews, are trying to take over the world trope for you in glorious technicolor. Here he is on a web show hosted by a far-right, avowedly anti-Semitic American pastor called Rick Wiles on True News Radio. This is where he used to have to peddle his stuff before the collective wisdom of the UK media decided to turn him into something of a celebrity.
The violence become very high indeed.
But is this going to become the norm? For nations that are in debt, I mean, are we going to see someday the central bankers of the world install the Prime Minister of Great Britain? They're going to install a future President of the United States? Is this where we're going?
Well, if I'd been on this show with you a year ago, and I'd said that when I come back in a year and we talk, there'll be a puppet Prime Minister in Greece, and even in a country of the scale of Italy, nobody listening would have believed it. But it's happened. It's happened with barely a murmur and barely a protest. So I would say that a very, very bad and very dangerous precedent has been set, and frankly, anything now is possible.
Bankers taking over the world as well. I'll leave you to wonder what the historical precedents are for that kind of rhetoric, or indeed that kind of opinion. And finally, back to Soros in the EU Parliament. Again, you have to remember the historical context of people claiming that Jews secretly run the world, or if they don't already, they certainly want to.
As Mr. Moscovici said at the start of this, the leak of all these papers and lists of people with offshore holdings has come about because of the Society of Investigative Journalists. But what's not been said this morning, and I think is relevant, is that the funding of these investigations came from one George Soros. Now, I say this at a time, I'm going to come back to so what, and it may have some personal interest for you as well. I say this at a time when the use of money and the influence it may have had on the Brexit result or the Trump election has reached a level of virtual hysteria. Just last week, the Electoral Commission in the UK launched an investigation to find out whether the Leave campaign took offshore money or Russian money. This came about as a result of questions asked in the House of Commons by one Ben Bradshaw, somebody linked to an organisation called Open Society. I just wonder, when we're talking about offshore money, when we're talking about political subversion, when we're talking about collusion, I wonder whether we're looking in the wrong place. And I say that because George Soros recently gave Open Society, his organisation, which of course campaigns for free movement of peoples and supports supranational structures like the European Union, he recently gave it $18 billion. And his influence here and in Brussels is truly extraordinary. Open Society boast that they had 42 meetings last year with the European Commission. They've even published a book of reliable friends in the European Parliament, and there are 226 names on that list, including yours, sir. I thought you'd find this interesting. We even had last week Mr. Verhofstadt lobbying on behalf of Mr. Soros at the Conference of Presidents in a battle that is going on with Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. If we're going to have a debate, and we're going to talk about full political and financial transparency, well, let's do it. So I should be writing today to all 226 of you, asking some pretty fair questions. Have you ever received funds, directly or indirectly, from Open Society? How many of their events have you attended? Could you please give us a list of the meetings of all the representatives, including George Soros yourself? And I think this Parliament should now set up a special committee to look into all of this. And I say that because I fear we could be looking at the biggest level of international political collusion in history.
I think at least 3 people clapped there, to be fair, in a room full of people. It slightly changes the complexion of that, doesn't it, now that he's refusing to conduct any inquiry whatsoever into Russian bribes being accepted by his own colleagues, close friends, party leaders in Wales. He apparently doesn't have the wherewithal or the funds to do that, although 10 minutes ago he was promising to conduct a nationwide inquiry into grooming gangs. And remember that the widespread attempts to somehow portray George Soros as trying to take over the world was in many ways a classic example of an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. So there it is. My apologies to everybody who was waiting to contribute to this hour of conversation. I was intending to let you answer the question of why he is allowed to get away with this in so many ways, including by people who normally reach immediately for the anti-Semitism allegation when dealing with, for example, people who dare to criticise the carnage that continues to unfold in Gaza. But hey-ho, I'm sure that they'll find their platforms, their loud-hailers, their mouthpieces, their consciences tomorrow.
Wow, so there you have it. Let's break it down. First, James lays out the evidence, not from anonymous sources, but from named individuals, over 20 of them, willing to go on the record about jokes involving the gas chambers and Adolf Hitler and all the rest of it. And when confronted, Farage's story crumbles. First, he claims that no one can remember what happened 50 years ago. Then when that doesn't work, he claims that he can remember perfectly that it didn't happen. So which is it? And did you notice the weasel words from Farage? Not in a hurtful way, not directly. How do you indirectly tell a Jewish classmate that Hitler was right? He won't give a straight denial because he knows that people are willing to testify in court. He's trapped by the truth. And the ultimate hypocrisy, as James points out, is the deafening silence from the same media ecosystem that rightfully scrutinized every word from Jeremy Corbyn. Why is Farage, a man currently leading in all of the polls, getting a free pass on allegations that are infinitely more vile and specific than anything Jeremy Corbyn ever did? So what do you think? What do you think the most revealing part of Farage's pathetic deflection is? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons for more, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching.